Hello, everyone. So I'm sorry that I cannot sing for you or play for you like Patrick, but as Logan just said, I'm with 417 Magazine. I regularly interview people. That's what I do for a living. I never do it in front of an audience, so this is new for me today, and I can tell you, you guys are in for a real treat. So just to give you a little bit of background, today, as you know, we're talking to Amy Blansit, and it was nearly 4 years ago that Amy and her husband, Drew Lewis, took a leap of faith and bought the Fairbanks building, which is located in Northwest Springfield's Grant Beach neighborhood. So the two had really high hopes for this building and transforming it into something that could make Springfield a better, basically for community betterment. That was their goal. Unfortunately, Drew lost his battle to cancer in 2013, and that did not stop Amy. She moved on and she kept working on their goal, working to transform that Fairbanks building into a community hub, which would be used as a resource in a neighborhood of Springfield that has families have really the most need there. So she's here today to talk to us about that and that project, her passion behind it, and really how she sees it fitting into Springfield's future. So, really quickly, Amy, before we get started, Biz 417 wanted to congratulate you. You guys might not know this yet, but Amy's company, Jolie, we just practiced this. Her company was just one of 5 that was accepted into the eFactory's second cohort of their accelerator program. So congratulations on that. Okay, to get started, Amy, you had a really unique upbringing, and we think compared to most people in the room, I think that's safe to say, and we want to talk to you a little bit about that, just share that and kind of how it affected you.
So I grew up in Blansit, Missouri, which is unique in itself, but born and raised in the area. But my parents were foster parents, not as me being in a foster home, but my biological parents chose to have children in their home. And so they had 7 of their own biologically, adopted an 8th, and over a period of 40 years, we probably had at least 150 children through our home. And so in that, the way that you are raised socially aware of individuals who have some of the greatest hardships, and to see what it means for them to be in a safe environment, what just a little bit of hope, a little bit of support, what that can do for a family, but more importantly, what that can do for a child. So I saw children come into our home when I felt like I had so much because they arrived with maybe just the clothes on their back. One evening I remember a mother had not enough gas to get to the next destination, so she had actually pulled into the gas station before automatic, pumped, and fled. And so she was actually pulled over. 2 children were confiscated from the car. They didn't have seatbelts. One of them wasn't wearing shoes. And I can just remember being young and hearing the story and realizing like how blessed I was. And my parents chose to be one parent working and one parent in the home. And I didn't know it at the time, but we actually were in the upper level of poverty ourselves. But because my parents chose to do that, they knew how to access resources, I really had no idea. So I saw something that was so much worse than what my situation was, that I grew up understanding where people came from and the battles that they went through, and the idea that when your adolescence misses all of the steps that parents just naturally do in middle and upper class, how do you and where do you get those lessons? And so as adults, to see many of those children have stayed a part of our family, to be adults and to realize the things that they still lack, or the way that they have to go about things harder than what it was for me, I just realized and appreciate the way that I was raised and the opportunities that people in middle class have that individuals who are born and raised into poverty do not have.
Okay, well, that kind of brings us to our next question, which is how did you become aware of the Grant Beach neighborhood and to the Fairbanks building?
So I decided that I grew up on a farm and I have tools, I like power tools, and decided that I was going to remodel a house. And this was right before the market crash. And so, but I knew that I needed to buy an inexpensive house and it needed to be old because it needed to be remodeled. And I had a crazy young realtor who had no idea what he was doing. Otherwise, luckily he had no idea what he was doing. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done what I did. But we ended up in Grant Beach, and there were a couple houses in that neighborhood, and ended up purchasing a house 10 years ago, remodeled it, lived in the neighborhood for a year and a half. I was okay being on the north side. For those of you who think that anything north of Chestnut Expressway doesn't exist, it's a wonderful place. Drew University is located there. It's where I went to college on a scholarship, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to go. And so I wasn't afraid of the north side, and I also knew it was the only place I could afford to be. So I found a wonderful home there, remodeled it, lived there a year and a half, got heavily involved, and then every day going to and from, I drove by the Fairbanks School, which is catapulted into where we are today and what we'll talk about.
Now, how would you say this Grant Beach neighborhood really represents the bigger issues that are in Springfield?
So Grant Beach, for those of you that don't know where that is, it's Chestnut Expressway, it is Commercial Street, it is Boonville and Kansas Expressway. And in the neighborhood, if you were here this morning, you saw the heat maps, or if you've been involved in any of Greg Burris or the city's informative meetings, you've seen those heat maps. And so statistics in Missouri, there's poverty rate is about 15%. In Springfield, it's almost 26%. And in Grant Beach, it's in the upper 30s or 40s, depending on the year that you look at the statistics. So when we take some of the concerns in Springfield, they're exaggerated in this neighborhood. We have oldest infrastructure. We have low socioeconomic opportunities for families. There's not a laundromat. So if you imagine you're already low income and just trying to keep clean clothes on your children, you've got to go outside your neighborhood, and now maybe transportation is an issue. So we've got a lot of compounded concerns that happen in a neighborhood, but it's not all that. We always focus on the negative. We also have families that have lived there for 30 years. They've built roots in that neighborhood, and they're committed, and so there's a passion about that neighborhood, and there's a commitment to it. And it's great to see that Springfield is becoming aware of something that was easy to kind of brush under the rug. And it's because there's a foundation in that neighborhood that is really willing and wanting to support the families.
Okay, and speaking of the families, I know that you've worked with a lot of them personally, and you, I'm sure, have some examples of things that, like, social impacts that are happening via this project. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of those?
Sure. So a CFO, the Ball Foundation in Musgrave, put together a 5-year grant called the Northwest Project. And in the project, one of the things that we really work on is creating opportunities for families. One of my employees, Christina Wilmoth, her mother had said, we're giving an adolescence back to adults who never got one. And what I mean by that is, when most of you probably had your first job, if you were mowing a lawn or you were babysitting, you had your first $20 or your $50 that you had saved up, and your parents walked you into the bank. They helped you create your little checking account and your little savings account, and you had your book, and you didn't know math at the time, but you knew numbers were going in this really adult thing, and you got to be a part of an adult program. With many of our families, they've never been into a bank. They never had a checking account or a banking account. Their parents didn't have one as well. So there's those lost opportunities where then as adults we just expect someone to know that. As a professor at Missouri State, I always kind of attune it to the idea that I'm going to give you all a chemistry test today. It's organic chemistry, and you should know it, right? And the harder you work, the more you stare at the test, you should be able to figure it out on your own, right? Because you're an adult. Why aren't you smart enough? Why aren't you sitting here all day long figuring out and studying it? You should be able to pass that test. The banking system is a test like that to our families, and no one's ever taught them the bits and pieces that it takes to answer the test correctly. So it's reintroducing them into systems. And by doing that, in just the 8 families that have, there's more families that we work with, but 8 that have been reintroduced into the banking system and working on budgeting with them, we've removed, through either consolidation, payday loans, over $50,000 in unsecured and predatory type debt, and it's freed up for those families over almost $1,500 a month that they now are able to put back into their family. So credit scores, those types of things that we're working on with very small amount, and we're talking about 6 months that we've been able to do that by just reintroducing families into the systems of middle class.
That's really impressive. Now, I know broadly Springfield is looking for solutions for poverty. And are there things that you've seen even on the national level that have been effective? And maybe talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So the Northwest Project was actually researched by CFO in order to find some national programs to bring together and to find some best practices. And in bits and pieces of things that have been done across the nation, first of all, I'll let you know that Springfield is way ahead of the trend. There's always this balance of how much do we talk about problems, Chamber of Commerce, versus the benefits and the beauty of our city, and we've got to address both, and we've got to do them in a way, because if 26% of our population is not consuming product because they're in poverty, that means 26% of your bottom line is affecting you. So it is your problem as a business owner, as a manager, as an employee. It's a problem for our city. And so in that, looking at how do we bring together different programs that have looked at it from a social economic all the way into how does that affect at the very lowest, or not lowest, but youngest level of the youth and children in our city. Generational poverty is what we really look at. How do we solve that so that it's both the child and the parent? And if any of you have seen or been a part of the Zone 1 Blitz, the city chose to do their open forums, as most do, in the schools. So when we look at how do we begin to solve problems, we've got to solve it at the family. In poverty, we see that women are typically the leaders of their, not only their family, but within their community. And so looking at economic opportunities, small business ideas for women, and the idea that they reinvest that into their family. The school, again, becomes so important, especially in the idea of a neighborhood or a community school. Typically, when we think about a community school or a neighborhood school, there's a connection that you feel. It's either where you went to school or it's where your children are going to school. You know it's a safe place for your children. But then once the doors close at 3 o'clock, there's so much opportunity in that building. And so we look at how can we bring services to the family. And the city, the SPS has been looking at community school like with Robertson. Can we bring in healthcare, and can we bring in resources? Can we bring in case management, and can we bring in after school eating program and tutoring? And so the school concept is so important. And our next neighborhood that we're moving into is Robertson, and we're going to be connecting with the school. The families, as I said, they feel safe there. The children are getting education, and it makes sense for the adults to get education there as well. And it's one of those things where most of the schools that we're going into are in the old infrastructure. And so we're looking at how do we use those facilities to the best of their ability. SPS is looking at a new plan, and it's important that we're providing resources to our families that are in our lowest area of, or our greatest area of need, but lowest resources. It's one of those where honestly, it's a little embarrassing that it's really easy for us to latch on to the idea of a new stadium, something shiny and new. We'll throw dollars at that, but when it comes to the actual computer or the book that the teacher needs, that's not sexy. And it's a hard sell, and our schools are fighting for that. And as citizens, it's our responsibility. This is a long-winded answer to say, really it comes back to community. That school may not be in your neighborhood, but that child who's going through that school, that family who's trying to keep that child clothed and working as hard as they can at a low-wage job, it's our responsibility as a community. A lot of times we don't want to be our brother's keeper, but when it affects your bottom line, when it affects a child, it would be shameful for you to not consider all the things that you can do, all the ways that you can get engaged to make Springfield a better place. If you want to look at it from a social economic component and your bottom line, that's fine. But do whatever it takes for you to find the passion that it takes to get involved and to help us make Springfield better.
All right. Well, this talk is titled how one woman brought hope to a forgotten neighborhood. So really just talking more specifically about that and implementation. Tell us how you really implemented the Northwest Project and how you did kind of renew that hope.
So a lot of times I get asked this question, and the question is, how did I do this? And I didn't do any of it, because that would be the I part. The only reason that any of this has happened is because I might have bought a building. I might have done something extremely crazy, but that was only the tipping point. It is crazy. But there's not been a week that hasn't gone by in the last 4 years, even when the building was, so for those of you that don't know, the building was going to be torn down because the utilities were shut off, it was caving in, and every week someone has walked in and said, I heard about this, how can I get involved? This is a service I provide, how can I do it here? This is my passion, and I heard you're doing this. How do I get connected to my community? How do I make a difference? So all I did was set into motion the ability for individuals to find their passion and to realize that it is time to act. We can sit back and we can wait for it to get so bad that there's no point of return, or like that. If you don't know how to get involved, come in and tell me what you like to do. And between Robertson and Heart of the West Side and every other neighborhood that is in the Northwest Quadrant that we're moving into, I will find a home for you. I will find a place that your hands, your expertise, or if nothing else, I will take your money. And I'm also very stingy. Our grant has been extended so far because also so many people have given for free that we're able to add more and more to what we're doing, because again, there's no I in what's happening. It is Springfield coming together. It is citizens even outside of Springfield saying, it is time to make a difference, and at least there's action. And that's the important part, is that sometimes we're throwing something against the wall, and whichever item sticks is what we're running down, but at least there is action, and we're moving forward. And so in that, it's creating community. It's holding hands, and it goes back to that idea of creating a safe place, just like the school system, for adults to come in, for there to be no judgment, for there to be no specific plan, and to look at each individual one-on-one and say, what is the first step? And sometimes the first step is simply health. We have a woman who couldn't move forward until blood pressure was managed, because that was all she could think about. And once it was a simple medication, then it was, now I can do the next step and the next step and the next step. So it's finding what's really holding them back and being able to move forward.
Okay. Well, I think that something that everyone in this room is probably wondering and could probably benefit from. So you just said it's not just you, it's this team that you're working with that has had such success with this program so far, and a program that's getting national attention. So I think that all of us could benefit from knowing, and maybe if you could think of it this way, if Amy Blansit from, say, 5 years ago even was sitting in our audience today, and she felt really motivated and very passionate, but a little bit overwhelmed because, like you said, it is as easy as walking in, but really, how do you get started? What do you do to make a difference, and how do you even begin? So what would maybe 3 things be that you would tell her to do?
I think the first one is the idea of knowing what the mission is, not of your business and not of the nonprofit you're involved in, but personally. What is it that you feel driven to do, that passion? And that's what I have learned, is that having a story and having a passion that gets others excited is the only reason people respond, the only reason people react. And so it's really finding what that is, because there have been some really long, really disappointing days. Things didn't go the way that we thought they should go. And it's coming back to that whole purpose and realizing, that's the focus, that's, the mission. And so finding that passion. The other is stretching. Knowing that if every day everything's the same and you're not uncomfortable, you really aren't giving much back. You've got to stretch. You've got to be slightly uncomfortable to be moving forward and to be growing. The last one is realizing, sometimes step back and look at the macro view. When all the details are so important, you again forget what that first point was of the idea of the mission and going back to that. So sometimes just take a step back and realize, why are you in this? What were you trying to get in the first place? So that's 3. I'd add a 4th, though, and this is the one that I'm working on, and it's don't forget to be present. We get so busy and we get so overwhelmed, and sometimes we forget to just be in that moment and to be present.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you for the bonus tip. I think that is all we have for today. So thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you.